Poor boy pays for a stranger's coffee, without knowing he just escaped death. A poor boy buys coffee for a stranger without knowing the man had just escaped death. The man, a millionaire who was betrayed and buried alive, sees in this gesture a reason to keep going. Silently, he decides to change the child's life, protecting his family from the shadows that surround them. But what happens next touches even the hardest hearts, and it all begins with a simple coffee. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Richard Morgan opened his eyes slowly, feeling every inch of his body ache. His blurry vision revealed only a cloudy sky and some tree branches in the distance. He tried to move, but his body felt like lead. He was disoriented, covered in dirt and leaves, lying in an isolated area on the edge of a rural road. Fragments of memory invaded his confused mind. The meeting with his partners, the toast proposed by Edward, his right-hand man for more than 15 years, the strange taste of the drink, and then darkness. Richard was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. At 45, he had transformed the small coffee company inherited from his father into an empire that dominated the national market and was beginning its international expansion. His fortune was estimated in billions, but what really set him apart in the business world was his impeccable strategic vision. Everyone wanted to be like Richard Morgan, the man who never missed a market prediction. Now, however, he was nothing more than an injured and abandoned man in an unknown location. With superhuman effort, he managed to sit up. His head was spinning, and panic was beginning to set in when he noticed the hole dug a few meters away. A feeling of terror invaded him as he recognized what appeared to be an improvised wooden coffin, partially buried, with its lid broken open. The memories came like lightning. He had awakened inside that coffin, desperately fighting against panic, the claustrophobia that had tormented him since childhood, digging with his own hands until he managed to break the lid and emerge from the earth. "They tried to erase me," he murmured to himself while trying to stand up. A paper fallen near the coffin caught his attention. With trembling hands, he unfolded what appeared to be a falsified death certificate in his name. Someone had planned his disappearance down to the smallest detail. With difficulty, Richard managed to stand. His designer suit, which cost more than a popular car, was in tatters, stained with dirt and sweat. He staggered toward the road, not knowing where to go. The strong sun punished his skin, intensifying his thirst and weakness. After a few minutes that seemed eternal, his legs gave way, and he fell to his knees on the dusty shoulder of the road. That's when he heard a child's voice. "Mister, are you okay?" Richard raised his eyes and saw a boy of approximately 10 years old, with simple clothes and a genuine smile. The boy was carrying a box of homemade sweets that he sold in the area. "Water, please," was all Richard could say. Without hesitation, the boy opened his worn backpack and offered a half-full water bottle. "You can drink it all, mister. You look like you need it more than I do." Richard drank eagerly, feeling life return to his dehydrated body. When he returned the empty bottle, he noticed the boy's concerned look. "Thank you," he murmured. "What's your name?" "My name is Matthew, but everyone calls me Matt. Can you walk? There's a coffee shop nearby where Mrs. Sophie lets me use the bathroom when I'm selling sweets. You can clean up a bit there." With young Matthew's help, Richard managed to stand and, leaning on the boy's shoulder, walked slowly for almost a mile until they reached a small roadside coffee shop. The place was simple but welcoming, with wooden tables and the unmistakable aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Mrs. Sophie, a gray-haired lady with an easy smile, widened her eyes at the sight of the man entering her establishment. "Good heavens, what happened to this man, Matt?" "I don't know, Mrs. Sophie. I found him collapsed on the road. Can he use the bathroom to clean up?" The owner quickly nodded and indicated the way to the small bathroom at the back of the coffee shop. Richard thanked her with a nod and headed to the location, his legs still wobbly. In the small bathroom mirror, he barely recognized his own reflection. His face was scratched and dirty, his eyes red and swollen, and a cut on his forehead was still bleeding slightly. He washed his face and hands, trying to organize his thoughts. Who had done this to him and why? Was his empire threatened? Who would take control of his companies now that the world believed he was gone? When he returned to the main area of the coffee shop, he found Matthew sitting at a table with a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. The boy smiled when he saw him. "I bought you a coffee," he said simply. "It's not much, but it'll help you feel better." Richard looked incredulously at the boy. In a world where people he considered family had tried to permanently silence him, this boy who had almost nothing was spending what little he had on a complete stranger. "You didn't have to." "Matthew," he replied, sitting down with difficulty in the chair. "When we can help, we help, right? That's what my grandmother always taught me." Richard held the cup with his still trembling hands and took a sip of the simple coffee. The strong and comforting flavor brought tears to his eyes. Not for the coffee itself, but for the gesture. Something inside him that he thought had died long ago seemed to awaken again. "Do you live nearby?" he asked, trying to divert attention from his own emotion. "Yes, sir. I live with my grandmother and my younger brother, Pete. He was born with a problem in his legs, can't walk properly. I sell sweets to help with expenses, you know. My grandma makes the best fudge balls in the region." Richard observed the box of sweets the boy was carrying. They were fudge balls, coconut sweets, and other homemade treats, individually wrapped in colored paper. "May I buy some?" Matthew's eyes lit up. "Of course. They're $5 each, or $50 for the whole box with 12 sweets." Richard realized he had nothing with him. No money, no documents, no cell phone, everything had been taken. "I'm sorry, Matthew. It seems I was robbed. I have no way to pay now." The boy's smile didn't diminish. "That's no problem. You can have this fudge ball as a gift," he said, taking a sweet from the box and placing it on the table. "It's my favorite dark chocolate. I bet you'll like it." At that moment, something changed inside Richard Morgan. All the anger and desire for revenge that were beginning to form gave way to a different, deeper emotion. That small act of kindness, coming from someone who had so little, touched a part of his soul that years of business ambition had buried. "Thank you, Matthew. You have no idea how much this means to me." As he savored the fudge ball, Richard made a decision. He wouldn't reveal his true identity, at least not for now. First, he needed to understand what had happened and who his enemies were. But one thing he knew for certain: he would never forget the boy who offered him water when he was thirsty and coffee when he was lost. "Do you always sell sweets around here, Matthew?" "Every day after school, sir. And on weekends, too. I always stop by this coffee shop on the way." Richard nodded, a plan beginning to form in his mind. Perhaps his return didn't need to be immediate. Perhaps before confronting the traitors, he needed to rediscover what really mattered. And that boy, with his sincere smile and generous heart, seemed to be the perfect guide for this journey. In the weeks that followed, Richard settled into a small inn on the outskirts of town, using the name Robert Smith. With Mrs. Sophie's help, he got an informal job as an assistant in the coffee shop, cleaning tables and washing dishes. At first, his hands, accustomed only to signing million-dollar contracts, suffered from the heavy work, but there was something strangely comforting in the simplicity of that routine. Established in anonymity, Richard began to regain his strength while formulating a plan. Using the only public telephone in the area, he managed to contact Carl Vincent, a trusted lawyer who had worked on his first business cases long before fame and fortune. Carl was one of the few who knew Richard before the power, a discreet and loyal man who had moved away from the corporate world to open a modest office in a small town. "So you're alive," Carl said on the phone, his voice a mixture of relief and concern. "The whole country believes you suffered a fatal accident at home. Edward Graham has temporarily taken control of the companies, along with your cousin Vanessa and that financial consultant, Patricia Miller." "The three of them together," muttered Richard, pieces fitting together in his mind. "I need you to investigate discreetly, Carl. Don't reveal to anyone that you spoke to me. I want to know what's happening with my companies, especially the foundation we were planning to launch." "The New Horizons Foundation? They accelerated the launch after your supposed accident. They're channeling millions there, but something seems strange in the financial structure. Investigate that, but be cautious. And I need money, new documents, a computer with secure internet access. Can you provide that without raising suspicions? Give me 3 days. While waiting for the resources promised by Carl, Richard continued his silent observation of Matthew's life. Daily the boy passed by the coffee shop, always with his radiant smile, selling the sweets made by his grandmother. Richard discovered that the boy woke up at 5 in the morning, helped his grandmother, in the kitchen cared for his younger brother, went to school and then sold sweets until nightfall. One afternoon, Richard decided to discreetly follow Matthew, curious to know the reality of the boy who hadn't left his thoughts. He followed him to a simple housing complex on the fringes of the town, where the boy entered a small brick house without finishing touches. Hidden behind a tree, Richard observed through windows without proper curtains. The house was modest, but clean and organized. A white-haired lady, who must be Matthew's grandmother, was cooking with difficulty, leaning on an improvised cane. On a mattress in the corner of the living room was a boy of approximately 6 years old, with orthopedic devices on his legs, drawing intently. The scene deeply touched Richard. That boy, who had helped him without expecting anything in return, lived in such precarious conditions, but maintained a dignity and joy that many of his millionaire acquaintances would never know. His observation was interrupted by the arrival of a burly man, visibly intoxicated and stumbling. By the behavior of Matthew and his grandmother, who immediately became tense, Richard realized that this was the stepfather mentioned by the boy in casual conversations. The man began to demand money, gesturing aggressively. Matthew, discreetly, positioned himself between his stepfather and his brother, a protective gesture that made Richard's heart ache. At that moment, he made a decision. He couldn't continue just observing. 3 days later, as promised, Carl appeared at Mrs. Sophie's coffee shop. Disguised as an ordinary traveler, he delivered to Richard a bag containing documents, money, a laptop, and a cell phone with a secure line. "The situation is worse than we thought," he informed in a low voice as they drank coffee in an isolated corner. "The foundation is a front. They're diverting your assets through a complex structure of shell companies. Edward has your main bank password, and with Patricia's help has managed to access your offshore accounts. Vanessa is using your power of attorney to sell smaller properties." Richard listened to everything in silence, more sad than furious. Edward was almost a brother, someone he had known since college, and with whom he had built the coffee empire. Vanessa, his second cousin, had been taken in by him when she lost her parents in adolescence. Patricia had been his financial consultant for a decade, someone he trusted blindly. "What do you want to do now?" asked Carl. "We can contact the authorities, reveal that you're alive." "Not yet," Richard replied, thoughtful. "I need more time. There's something I need to do first." The next day, Richard began to implement his plan to help Matthew and his family. Using the resources provided by Carl, he discreetly hired a social worker and a physical therapist to assess young Peter's situation. Through intermediaries, he arranged for the boy to receive specialized treatment at a clinic in the capital, with transportation included. For Matthew's grandmother, Clara, he provided complete medical consultations and medications she couldn't afford. All this anonymously, always through legitimate institutions or professionals who didn't ask questions about the source of the funds. The most delicate part of the plan involved the stepfather. After discreet investigation, Richard discovered that the man had several pending issues with the law. Through Carl, he arranged for a justice officer to appear at the family's home with old warrants, offering a deal. The man should leave town or face legal consequences. The strategy worked, and the stepfather disappeared without even saying goodbye. Meanwhile, Richard continued working at the coffee shop, getting closer and closer to Matthew, who now considered him a friend. The boy shared his stories, dreams, and concerns, without imagining that the simple man who swept the floor and washed dishes was actually responsible for the mysterious changes in his life. "You know, Mr. Robert," said Matthew one afternoon, as they ate fudge balls together after work, "strange things are happening at my house. Suddenly my brother Pete is going to a fancy clinic. My grandma got a specialist doctor, and even my stepfather disappeared. The social worker said there's an anonymous benefactor helping us. Do you think it could be an angel?" Richard smiled, touched by the boy's innocence. "Maybe it's just someone who recognized how special you and your family are, Matthew. But who would spend so much money on people they don't even know? Sometimes people do unexpected things when they're touched by genuine kindness," replied Richard, thinking about how a simple coffee offered by a boy had completely transformed his perspective on life. In parallel with the actions to help Matthew's family, Richard continued his investigation into the betrayal he had suffered. Carl discovered that the fraudulent foundation created by Edward, Vanessa, and Patricia had already diverted almost 30% of his fortune. The speed with which they acted suggested desperation, as if they feared the truth might come to light at any moment. "They made mistakes because of the rush," explained Carl during one of their secret meetings. "They left trails we can use against them when you decide to reveal yourself. And the media? What are they saying about my supposed accident? The first weeks were intense. Your face was on all magazine covers and newspapers. Now, 2 months later, the dust is settling. The official version is that you suffered a fatal domestic accident. The body, supposedly, was found in an unrecognizable state, and Edward arranged a private funeral only for family and close friends." Richard shook his head, impressed by the audacity of the plan, and no one questioned this story. Some investigative journalists raised doubts, but without concrete evidence, suspicions soon dissipated. "The empire you built is too big, Richard. People are more concerned about the future of the companies than with the details of what happened to you." "And what will happen to Matthew and his family when I reveal myself?" asked Richard, more to himself than to Carl. "You really care about them, don't you?" Richard looked out the coffee shop window, watching Matthew enthusiastically sell his sweets to a group of tourists. "More than I thought possible," he answered honestly. "That boy saved me, Carl. Not just that day on the road, but every day since then. He reminded me what it is to be human, what really matters in this life." Carl observed his friend with a new look. The Richard he knew before was a brilliant businessman, but emotionally distant, always focused on the next goal, the next acquisition. The man before him seemed to have found something more valuable than all the empire he had built. "What do you intend to do then?" "I need some more time," replied Richard, determined. "I want to ensure that Matthew's family is completely safe before confronting the traitors, and to be honest, I'm still trying to understand what I'll do with my life when this is all over." He finished his coffee. Richard observed the movement of the small coffee shop, so different from the luxurious restaurants he used to frequent. There was an authenticity there, in the simple people, in the unpretentious conversations, in the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. For the first time in decades, he felt at peace with himself. "You know, Carl," he finally said, "I spent my entire life building an empire, accumulating wealth, seeking power and recognition. And in the end, it was a boy selling sweets who showed me the true value of things." 5 months had passed since Richard had begun his new life as Robert Smith. The small town, which initially would be just a temporary refuge, was beginning to feel like a real home. His simple routine at Mrs. Sophie's coffee shop brought a satisfaction he had never experienced in board meetings and shareholder gatherings. The transformation in Matthew's family's life was visible to everyone in the community. The modest house had received structural renovations, with accessibility ramps for Peter and equipment that facilitated the boy's mobility. Grandma Clara, after proper medical treatment, was gradually regaining her vitality. The fudge balls and homemade sweets, now professionally packaged under the name Grandma Clara's Sweets, were beginning to gain regional fame. Matthew, meanwhile, continued his studies with excellence, now aided by private tutors anonymously hired by Richard. The boy maintained his generous and hard-working essence, but his eyes shone with a new kind of hope. For Richard, witnessing this transformation was like witnessing a daily miracle. On a sunny afternoon, while helping Mrs. Sophie organize the coffee shop's inventory, Richard was surprised by Carl's unexpected arrival. The lawyer's concerned expression indicated that something serious had happened. "We need to talk," said Carl, leading Richard to a distant table. "Edward has started selling shares of your main companies. They're accelerating the asset transfer process. If we don't act soon, your empire will be completely compromised." Richard nodded, thoughtful. "It's time then. Did you prepare the documents I asked for?" "Yes, everything is ready. The evidence of fraud has been organized. The transfer contracts for the new foundation have been drafted. But I must warn you, Richard, when you resurface, it will be an earthquake in the corporate world. The media will go crazy, and the peaceful life you've built here—" "I know," interrupted Richard. "That's why I need to ensure that Matthew and his family are protected before anything else." That same night, Richard decided it was time for a frank conversation with Grandma Clara. Presenting himself at the family's home, he was received with the same affection as always. Peter, now using a special walker, came to hug him at the door. Matthew, who had just returned from school, smiled when he saw him. "Mr. Robert, what a nice surprise. Have you come to try the new sweet that Grandma invented?" "Actually, Matthew, I came to talk to you all about something important." Seated in the modest living room, Richard finally revealed his true identity. He told them about his life as a businessman, the betrayal he suffered, and how Matthew's act of kindness had completely changed his perspective on what really mattered. "So it was you who helped us all this time?" asked Grandma Clara with tears in her eyes. "Our mysterious angel." "You've helped me much more than I've helped you," Richard replied honestly. "Especially your grandson. Matthew taught me about true generosity when he offered coffee to a dirty and disoriented stranger." Matthew, still assimilating the revelation, seemed confused. "But you're rich, famous. Why did you stay working at the coffee shop? Why didn't you go back to your life before?" Richard smiled, touching the boy's shoulder. "Because I needed to rediscover what really has value, Matthew, and I only found that here, with you." He then explained that he would need to reclaim his identity in the coming days, confront those who had betrayed him, and reorganize his businesses. However, he had made important decisions that would change the future for all of them. "I want to offer you a new beginning," he said, looking into Grandma Clara's eyes. "I know it's an important decision, and I don't want to rush anyone. But I would like to formalize the adoption of Matthew and Peter, if you agree. Grandma Clara, you would come with us, of course, as a fundamental part of this family we are building." The silence that followed was broken by the emotional sobs of the old lady. Matthew, with watery eyes, was the first to speak. "You want to be our dad? If you'll accept me, it would be the greatest honor of my life." Matthew's spontaneous hug was the most sincere answer he could receive. Peter joined them, and soon Grandma Clara was also part of that collective embrace that sealed a new beginning for everyone. The next morning, Richard and Carl put into action the carefully elaborated plan. The first step was to convene an extraordinary and confidential meeting with the main executives of Morgan Enterprises, strategically excluding Edward, Vanessa, and Patricia. The news that Richard was alive and would retake control of his businesses should be kept in absolute secrecy until the right moment. In parallel, legal provisions were taken to ensure the safety of Matthew, Peter, and Grandma Clara. Temporary custody documents were prepared, and a discreet security team was designated to protect the family. The most difficult part of the plan would be the direct confrontation with the traitors. Richard decided to do it in the mansion that had been his home for so many years, now occupied by Edward, who had practically appropriated everything that belonged to him. On the appointed day, Richard arrived at the gate of his former residence, wearing an impeccable suit, but without the ostentatious accessories he used to wear. Carl accompanied him, along with 2 justice officers and a private investigator who had documented all the frauds. When the mansion's security guard recognized him, the shock was immediate. The man turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. "Mr. Morgan, but weren't you—" "As you can see, I'm very much alive. Please announce my arrival to Mr. Graham. Tell him the owner of the house has returned." The scene that followed in the main hall of the mansion will forever be etched in Richard's memory. Edward, who was savoring a late breakfast while reading financial reports, dropped his cup when he saw him enter. Vanessa, who was discussing new investments on the phone, abruptly interrupted the call. Patricia, who was analyzing spreadsheets on her laptop, closed the device as if she had been caught red-handed. "This is impossible," murmured Edward, his face as pale as wax. "You can't be here." "It's curious how life surprises us, isn't it, old friend?" replied Richard, his calm voice contrasting with the tension in the environment. "Especially when we're betrayed by those we considered family." What followed was a painful but necessary confrontation. Richard presented the evidence of the fraud elaborated by the trio, revealing every detail of the plan they had devised to appropriate his fortune. The justice officers delivered documents that immediately blocked all financial transactions of the companies and froze the personal assets of the accused. "Why, Edward?" asked Richard, when they were alone for a moment. "We were like brothers. We built all this together." Edward, now defeated, let the bitterness he had cultivated for years show through. "You were always the brilliant one, the visionary, while I was just the executor. 20 years by your side, Richard, and always in your shadow. When Patricia suggested the plan, it seemed like the only chance to finally get the recognition I deserved. And was it worth it? Betraying the trust of someone who would trust you with his own life?" Edward didn't answer, his silence more eloquent than any justification. The legal process would be long and complex, but Richard wasn't interested in revenge. With Carl's help, he offered a deal, in exchange for complete confessions and return of the diverted assets. The three would receive reduced sentences, not out of clemency, but because Richard had bigger plans that didn't include dragging his name and his companies through prolonged scandals. While the lawyers finalized the details of the agreement, Richard walked through the rooms of his mansion, a place he once considered his refuge. Now those luxurious spaces seemed cold and lifeless. His thoughts were on the small house in the small town, where Matthew, Peter, and Grandma Clara awaited him. There, between simple walls and sincere smiles, he had found the true meaning of home. In the days that followed, the news that Richard Morgan was alive exploded in the national media. Journalists camped in front of the mansion. Speculations about what had really happened dominated the news, and the value of Morgan Enterprises shares violently oscillated with each new piece of information. Richard, however, kept away from the spotlight. Instead of granting exclusive interviews or participating in press conferences, he issued only an official statement through his advisors, confirming that he was alive and gradually resuming control of his businesses. No mention was made of the betrayal or the ongoing legal proceedings. His priority at that moment was different. With the help of child development specialists and social workers, he prepared the transition of Matthew and Peter to their new life. He didn't want the boys to be exposed to the morbid curiosity of the press or traumatized by the abrupt change in reality. "We'll do this at your pace," he explained to the gathered family in one of the many conversations they had during that period. "The mansion is too big and full of memories I prefer to leave behind. I'm looking for a new house, more welcoming, where we can build our own memories." Matthew, always sensitive to others' emotions, asked, "Will you still want to be our dad after you go back to being rich and famous?" The question, in its childlike simplicity, deeply touched Richard. "Matthew, I have never wanted anything in my life as much as I want to be your father. Wealth and fame are circumstances. They don't define who we are. What I discovered in these months is that true fortune lies in the connections we make, in the love we share, in the difference we make in each other's lives. Like the coffee I offered you that day." Exactly like that coffee. The most valuable gesture I've ever received in my entire life. A year had passed since Richard Morgan had reclaimed his identity and completely transformed his life. The family's new residence, a spacious country house on the outskirts of town, balanced comfort and simplicity. Extensive gardens surrounded the main house where Richard, Matthew, Peter, and Grandma Clara daily built memories that no fortune could buy. The adoption process for the boys was officially finalized after 6 months of legal procedures. In the intimate ceremony at the courthouse, Matthew held Richard's hand tightly, as the judge declared them officially father and sons. Peter, now using only a light cane after intense physical therapy, smiled as he received his new identity document. Grandma Clara, emotional, officially became part of that family not through papers, but through the love that united them. "I think the judge didn't understand one thing," commented Matthew as they left the courthouse. "He said you're adopting us, but actually we adopted you first, didn't we?" Richard laughed, embracing his son tenderly. The wisdom of that child never ceased to surprise him. "You're absolutely right, Matthew. You chose me when I was lost, and that made all the difference." Morgan Enterprises went through a profound restructuring. Richard stepped away from the executive presidency, taking only a position on the administrative board, with monthly meetings that didn't compromise his time with his family. The coffee empire continued to prosper, but now had a new mission, aligned with the values that Richard had rediscovered. The Coffee of Fanfang Hope Foundation, officially created 6 months after his return, became the beating heart of his business activities. Unlike the fraudulent foundation planned by his former partners, this one had a genuine purpose: transforming lives through education and social inclusion, especially children with disabilities and elderly people in vulnerable situations. The foundation's first project was the acquisition and complete renovation of Mrs. Sophie's small coffee shop, transforming it into a model space that employed at-risk youth and people with disabilities. The aroma of freshly ground coffee continued to be the trademark of the place, now called Coffee of Hope, but the original simplicity gave way to a welcoming and inclusive environment, with a menu developed by renowned chefs and Grandma Clara's, sweets as the stars of the house. On a sunny spring morning, Richard proudly observed the activity at the new Children's Rehabilitation Center built by the foundation. Peter was doing his exercises under the supervision of specialized physical therapists, while other children with different needs received personalized care. Matthew, who now divided his time between school and volunteer projects, was accompanying a group of elderly people in a crafts workshop. "I never imagined I would find so much satisfaction in something beyond business," commented Richard to Carl, who visited the family regularly and had become a close friend. "You were always a visionary in business, Richard. Now you've just directed that vision towards something more meaningful." "You know what Matthew told me yesterday?" Richard smiled, remembering the conversation with his son, that the coffee he offered me that day was the best investment he ever made in his life. Just imagine, he talks about investment at 12 years old. The two laughed, observing the boy who, from a distance, was patiently helping an elderly woman finish her craft piece. "And what about the 3? Asked Carl, referring to the former partners who had betrayed Richard. "Any regrets about the deal you proposed?" Richard shook his head negatively. The agreement had allowed Edward, Vanessa, and Patricia to avoid prison in exchange for the full return of the diverted values and supervised community work. Edward now managed an adult literacy project in the northeastern part of the country. Vanessa coordinated a community garden program in underprivileged communities, and Patricia used her financial knowledge to educate young people about economics and entrepreneurship in vulnerable regions. "Revenge would only perpetuate the cycle of bitterness," replied Richard. "They lost much more than money or status. They lost people's trust, professional respect, peace of mind. Perhaps through the work they're doing now, they'll find some redemption." "You've changed, Richard, and for the better." "No, Carl. I just rediscovered who I really was, before the corporate world transformed me into someone obsessed with success and power." In the afternoon, Richard conducted his first class in the new social entrepreneurship course created by the foundation. Among the students were young people from peripheral communities and small rural producers seeking knowledge to transform their realities. Richard didn't speak as a distant billionaire, but as someone who deeply understood the value of work, perseverance, and, most importantly, humanity in business. The true entrepreneur is not one who accumulates wealth, but one who generates value for society, he explained, walking between the tables. "For years I believed my legacy would be measured by the size of my empire. Today I know it will be measured by the difference I made in people's lives." One of the students, a young farmer from the region, raised his hand. Mr. Morgan, you had everything and almost lost everything. What would you say is the most important thing not to lose sight of, even when we achieve success? Richard reflected for a moment, recalling his journey. Never forget the people who extended a hand when you needed it, even without knowing who you were or what you could offer in return. Genuine gratitude is the best antidote against the arrogance that often accompanies success. After class, Richard found Matthew waiting for him at the classroom door. The boy, now a teenager, had inherited from his adoptive father not only the Morgan surname, but also determination and entrepreneurial vision now directed towards social causes. How was the class, Dad? Productive. And your workshop with the elderly? Amazing, Mrs. June told stories about when she worked in the coffee harvest. She said it was the best coffee in America, but she could never afford to buy a cup in the big city cafes where the beans were sold. Richard smiled, an idea beginning to form in his mind. You just gave me a brilliant idea, son. In the following weeks, Richard and Matthew developed together a new project for the foundation, the Origins Coffee. The initiative consisted of creating a network of coffee shops managed by rural producers who historically had been only suppliers, never protagonists of the final business. Each establishment would tell the story of those families, valuing traditional knowledge and ensuring that profit returned directly to the producing communities. The pilot project was inaugurated 6 months later, with Mrs. June as honorary manager. The coffee shop, located in an upscale neighborhood of the capital, attracted customers not only for the exceptional quality of the coffee, but for the authentic experience of connection with the product's origins. In an interview for an important business magazine, the first he granted since his return, Richard explained the philosophy behind the project. Coffee has always been the heart of my business, but I had forgotten its true value. It's not in the profits it generates, but in the people who produce it, in the stories that unfold around a steaming cup, in the moments of human connection it provides. It was a coffee offered with generosity that changed my life, and now I want each cup served in our coffee shops to have the potential to transform other lives as well. The article, which occupied the magazine's cover, didn't focus on the drama of his supposed disappearance or the scandal involving his former partners, but on the genuine transformation of a man and the legacy he was building. The photo chosen for the cover didn't show Richard in his luxurious office, but sitting on a simple bench in Mrs. Sophie's original coffee shop next to Matthew, Peter, and Grandma Clara, all smiling with cups of coffee in their hands. On the second anniversary of the day Matthew found him on the road, Richard organized a special celebration for family and close friends. The party, held at the country house, gathered people from all phases of his life. Loyal former employees, new foundation collaborators, residents of the community where it all began. During the celebration, Richard called Matthew for a private moment in the garden away from the guests. I have something for you, he said, handing his son a small package. Matthew carefully opened the package, revealing an old, slightly chipped cup. Is this... Yes, the same cup in which you served me coffee that day at Mrs. Sophie's coffee shop. I asked her to keep it for me. It's the most valuable object I own. Matthew's eyes watered. But it was just a simple coffee, Dad. Anyone would have done the same. No, son, that wasn't just any coffee, and you're not just anyone. You offered me much more than a beverage. You offered humanity when I had lost mine. That gesture changed not only my life, but the lives of thousands of people who are now benefited by the foundation. Matthew hugged his father tightly, words unnecessary in that moment of pure connection. Later, watching his sons play with other children in the garden, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him there. The betrayal he suffered, which initially seemed like the worst possible tragedy, had become the catalyst for the best phase of his life. The man who was once defined by his financial empire now found his identity in the love of his family and the positive impact he generated around him. A coffee can really change the world, he murmured to himself as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. One gesture at a time, one life at a time. The Coffee of Hope Foundation continued to grow in the following years, extending its projects to various regions of the country. Matthew, upon turning 18, officially took over the direction of the educational program, implementing innovative methodologies that combine traditional teaching with social entrepreneurship. Peter, exceeding medical expectations, became a Paralympic athlete, inspiring other children with disabilities to pursue their dreams. Grandma Clara, with her wisdom and unforgettable sweets, became the matriarch not only of the family, but of the entire community that formed around the foundation. Richard Morgan, the man who once built an empire based on numbers and profits, discovered that his true legacy would be measured by the light in the eyes of those whose lives he had touched. And it all began with a simple act of kindness, a coffee offered by a boy who, having almost nothing, gave everything he could. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that Richard and Matthew's story has warmed your hearts as much as a good cup of coffee on a cold morning. To continue this journey of emotions and reflections, we've prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If this narrative touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Daily, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. Share with us in the comments. What seemingly simple gesture profoundly transformed your life?